There is something about Christmas that captures our imagination. Maybe it's the decorations that adorn our surroundings, trees, packages, sparkling lights. Perhaps it's the joy that permeates the music of the season. Christmas songs and carols that seem to follow us no matter where we might go. It could be the massive amount of sweets that we tend to eat, giving us a sugar high. Or the warm embrace of family traditions that ground us. Maybe it's the excitement of anticipating a visit from a jolly old elf. Something about Christmas that invites us to imagine, to envision a world that is different from what we've grown accustomed to. Like a fairy tale, Christmas invites our imagination. You know how fairy tales begin, right? Once upon a time. Of course, that once upon a time can be stated in different ways, like a long time ago in a galaxy far, far away. Or 'twas the night before Christmas, and all through the house not a creature was stirring, not even a mouse. The stockings were hung by the chimney with care in hopes that St. Nicholas soon would be there. Yes, fairy tales start with some statement of once upon a time, removing them from a specific time in history, signifying that it probably didn't really happen, but wouldn't it be wonderful if it did? And we think it would be wonderful because deep in the human heart is a longing for good to triumph over evil. A longing for a love that can endure all things, that never lets us down. A longing to escape our mortality. We long for fairy tales like Beauty and the Beast or Sleeping Beauty to be true. I mention those two fairy tales in particular because they happen to be among my favorites. Beauty and the Beast that captures the human condition, that our self-centered, narcissistic, sinful ways threaten to make us beastly, even evil, as it did for the prince in that story. And then Belle, through showing forgiveness and grace and love, enabling him to break away from the beastliness that he had created for himself. Sleeping Beauty tells us that an evil reality is in this world that can put us into a sleep that ends our relationships with others, that ends our life. But there is a noble prince that can come and save us, giving us new life. Our imaginations are captured by those stories, those fairy tales, because deep inside our hearts we want to believe they can be true. Evil should not triumph. We should not lose the ones that we love. Death should not be the end. And though the world around us tells us that such desires are nothing more than children's fantasies and folly, still our hearts long for them to be true. As I said earlier, fairy tales begin with once upon a time. But I hope that you notice that's not how the Christmas story begins. The Christmas story in Matthew's Gospel begins with the words, "Now the birth of Jesus the Messiah took place in this way." Luke begins his Christmas story saying, "A decree went out from Caesar Augustus." And friends, that's significant. Because though some may think that the Christmas story is little more than another fairy tale, the Bible refutes that by grounding Jesus in history, not once upon a time. Those who wrote the Gospels are saying the story is the ultimate of realities. This is what happened. You can bet your life on it. Friends, Christmas really happened. I like the way that Max Lucado captures what happened. He writes, "It all happened in a moment, a most remarkable moment. God became a man. While the creatures of earth walked unaware, divinity arrived. Heaven opened herself and placed her most precious one in a human womb. The Omnipotent, in one instant, made himself breakable. He who had been spirit became pierceable. He who was larger than the universe became an embryo. And he who sustains the world with a word chose to be dependent upon the nourishment of a young girl. God was given eyebrows, elbows, 2 kidneys, and a spleen. He stretched against the walls and floated in the amniotic fluids of his mother. God came near. He came not as a flash of light or as an unapproachable conqueror, but as one whose first cries were heard by a peasant girl and a sleepy carpenter. The hands that first held him were unmanicured, calloused, and dirty. Were it not for the shepherds, there would have been no reception. And were it not for a group of stargazers, there would have been no gifts. Angels watched as Mary changed God's diaper. The universe watched with wonder as the Almighty learned to walk. Children played in the street with him. Jesus may have had pimples. He may have been tone deaf. Perhaps a girl down the street had a crush on him, or vice versa. It could be that his knees were bony. One thing's for sure, he was, while completely divine, completely human. For 33 years, he would feel everything that you and I have ever felt. He felt weak. He grew weary. He was afraid of failure. He got colds, burped, and had body odor. His feelings got hurt. His feet got tired. And his head ached. To think of Jesus in such a light is, well, it seems almost irreverent, doesn't it? It's not something we like to do. It's uncomfortable. It's much easier to keep the humanity out of the incarnation. Clean the manure from around the manger, wipe the sweat out of his eyes, pretend he never snored or blew his nose or hit his thumb with a hammer. He's easier to stomach that way. There is something about keeping him divine that keeps him distant, packaged, predictable. But don't do it. For heaven's sake, don't do it. Let him be as human as he intended to be. Let him into the mire and muck of our world, for only if we let him in can he pull us out. Listen to him. Love your neighbor was spoken by a man whose neighbors tried to kill him. Pray for those who persecute you came from the lips that would soon be begging God to forgive his murderers. I am with you always are the words of a God who in one instant did the impossible to make it all possible for you and me. It all happened in a moment. A most remarkable moment. The Word became flesh to dwell among us. Those who were there tell us the Christmas story is no fairy tale. So you can believe good will overcome evil. You can know a love that will never let you down. You can be assured death has been defeated by life which is everlasting in the kingdom of heaven. For God became flesh in our history as Mary laid her baby in that manger of Bethlehem. It's not a fairy tale. The story of Jesus is true.